It was a record close on Wall Street following what you could call a trade truce. Over the weekend at the G20 summit in Japan, the U.S. and China agreed to hold off on levying more tariffs in an effort to get trade talks going again. President Trump also said the U.S. would relax restrictions on American companies selling products to Chinese telecom giant Huawei. As a result, stocks got an initial lift, and while the gains were more than halved, it was still a record day. The Dow rose 117 points to 26,717. The Nasdaq, helped by the chip stocks, we'll have more on them in a moment, rose about 85, and the S&P 500 climbed 22 to a record, its sixth so far this year. We have two reports on trade, starting with Kayla Tausche in Washington.
After a 6-week standoff, President Trump and President Xi brokered a ceasefire in 80 minutes. Trump agreed to relax a ban on Huawei in exchange for China's buying more farm goods, and there will be no new tariffs. The truce has no deadline, which means President Trump can end it whenever talks fall through, or keep it going as long as it's politically useful, telling reporters he's in no rush.
So we're making a deal with China, or we're attempting. And if we don't, we'll go back into, we have a tremendous ripe field of tremendous money that would be coming into our country. I'm not rushed, and I told him that I want to get the deal right.
Multinational companies are relieved tensions have eased, but have more questions than answers about what comes next.
What's the timeline for these negotiations? How serious are both sides at coming to a resolution? What happens if they can't reach an agreement on these issues? Because that $300 billion list of tariffs is still looming out there. It's just put on hold for the moment.
And the issues that sank talks in May are still outstanding, namely China's ability to legally enforce the deal. China's hardliners don't seem any easier to sway now, and hawks in Washington are not happy the White House is bargaining with a company seen as a national security risk. At least 3 Republicans slamming the decision, and one Florida Senator Marco Rubio suggesting he'll introduce a bill to reverse it. With so many competing forces, future sales for Huawei vendors are still in question.
Is this going to be part of an endgame trade deal, or is this something that he's going to reserve as a national security issue?
In Osaka, the president wouldn't commit.
Huawei is very much in play in terms of our country and in terms of intelligence and the intelligence community. We're not making it a big subject. We're going to save that for later.
When later isn't clear. Asked when a new round of talks could take place, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and the Treasury Department said they had no scheduling announcements. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Kayla Tausche in Washington.
And now to China with a look at how the trade truce is playing out there. Eunice Yoon is in Beijing.
The Chinese are generally relieved with the outcome, but cautious. In official statements and media reports, they are pleased with the delay of new tariffs, that there is no deadline for negotiations, and they're especially happy that hometown tech champ Huawei gets a reprieve. In addition, the Chinese side has been left with an impression that President Trump has agreed to Beijing's preconditions for a trade deal, what are described here as its 3 red lines, lifting all the imposed tariffs, more realistic purchases of U.S. goods, and balanced text in the final deal. That's because President Trump, according to the Foreign Ministry, agreed to move forward on the basis of, quote, equality and mutual respect. Despite the fresh direction, there's still apprehension that a trade agreement will get done. Sources close to the trade talks on the Chinese side have noticed that President Trump is already under pressure from Congress and the national security community to maintain his original tough position on Huawei. One other interesting development here, the Chinese press are not reporting China's agreement to buy more American farm products, or that the U.S. has not reduced the current tariffs. That shows how sensitive the leadership is to appearing weak, or that it's giving in to U.S. pressure. An indication of just how challenging the domestic political environment here is for Beijing to make even further serious compromises. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Eunice Yoon in Beijing.